All right, so walk into any gym in the country and you'll find two lifters who have been training for the exact same amount of time, same number of months, same number of sessions, sometimes even the same exact program copied line for line off the same app, and they're going to look completely different. One of them has visibly changed, shoulders are filled out, arms are noticeably bigger, the kind of change that like people in the gym actually fucking notice. On the other hand, the other guy looks almost exactly the same as he did when he first started, right? But it's this, same effort, same attendance, right? They got there at the same time, same work through and through. All right. If you've ever been that second lifter, I want you to hear this. It's not because you didn't work hard enough. It's because almost nobody ever teaches you how to actually build muscle. Okay. Everyone in the fitness industry has an opinion about building muscle. You train to failure every set, never train to failure, high reps for the pump or low reps just for density, train each muscle once a week for maximum recovery, or train each muscle every other day for maximum frequency. Half of that advice, it contradicts itself and contradicts the other, and somewhere in the middle, all right, you're the one left guessing. The average gym goer, the guy or the gal who's just trying to get fucking jacked. And today, we're gonna go further and we're gonna cover the actual dials that you can turn, like how much volume you need, how hard you need to train, how often, and kind of where genetics fit into all of it. And by the end of this episode, you're not going to need anyone's opinion on any of this. You'll know how to read your own results and kind of turn the dials to what you need to start actually getting the changes you want to see. And furthermore, if you want to work with me as a coach, there'll be a link down in the description below to apply for one-on-one coaching. All right, so let's get into it. All right, so here's exactly what you're going to walk away with today. You're going to understand how much training volume actually drives growth, and at the point past which more sets stop helping and start working against you. You'll understand how close to failure you actually need to train, and why the answers are going to surprise most of the people that are watching this. You'll understand how often to train each muscle group for the fastest realistic rate of growth. And you'll understand what genetics actually control and what they don't, so you can stop kind of comparing your week 1 or 2 to someone else's year 3 or 4. This episode is going to turn all of this effort into results, and let's start why any of this matters, and beyond how you look in the mirror. Okay. All right, so before we get into the mechanics of everything, I want to be clear about why muscle actually matters. And before you think it's just about aesthetics, you're underselling what you're actually building. Muscle tissue, it's metabolically active, and the more you carry, the more calories your body burns at rest, which makes managing your body composition easier for the rest of your life, not more difficult. Okay? Muscle is your body's primary site for glucose disposal, so more muscle mass and more places for your body to store carbohydrates as fuel instead of letting it circulate and stress your metabolic system, right? That's not just some kind of bodybuilding bullshit, all right? That's good for long-term health, all right? And muscle, we call it kind of like an armor. It's joint protection. It protects your joints, stabilizes your spine, and reduce the risk of injury during everyday physical demands that we talked about in episode 1. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. Like we talked about carrying groceries, moving furniture, catching yourself when you trip or slip. And then muscle is one of the strongest predictors we have of health aging. Starting in your 30s, the average adult loses muscle mass every single year if they don't actively train against it. That process is called sarcopenia. And by your 70s, 80s, it's one of the biggest factors separating people who stay independent and from people who don't. So when we talk about building muscle in this episode, this video, we're not talking about just some vanity like metrics. We're talking about building tissue that's going to keep you capable for decades. And that's kind of the whole philosophy for this academy. It's going to be applied directly. Now let's get into the science of how this actually happens and how to stop losing muscle and continue to gain it. In episode 1, I told you mechanical tension is a primary driver of muscle growth. That hasn't changed. Everything in this section builds on that one fact. So if you haven't watched that episode, again, like I said earlier, go back and see it. Today, we're looking at the variables that determine how much of that growth signal you actually get and how much of it your body can actually use. So we're going to start with volume. Volume simply means how many hard sets you do for a given muscle group per week. Research consistently shows a dose response relationship. More volume up to a point produces more growth, but it's not like a straight line forever. You're not going to trajectory forever. Below a certain threshold, roughly 4 to 6 hard sets per muscle group per week, you're likely leaving some fucking gains on the table, guys. All right. We don't want to leave a growth there. All right. So that's your minimum effective volume. But above a certain threshold, typically somewhere around 20 sets per muscle group per week, for most trained lifters, additional sets stop producing meaningfully more growth and instead start eating into your recovery capacity. All right, so that's your maximum adaptive volume. And past it, you're accumulating fatigue without any real good return on it. So for most people, the sweet spot is going to be somewhere in between 10 to 20 hard sets per muscle group per week. And the right number for you is going to depend on your training age, recovery capacity, and how well you're eating and sleeping. So that's volume. The next thing we're going to look at is intensity. Okay. So intensity meaning how close to your maximum effort each set actually is. And here's where a lot of that confusion kind of lives is intensity in strength science doesn't mean how hard a workout feels. It refers specifically to how much weight you're using relative to your 1 rep max or how close a set is taken to failure. The research here points to something called effective reps, the last several repetitions of a set, the ones where the weight is genuinely starting to slow down and challenging your technique are the reps doing most of the work to trigger growth. The first several reps of a set, when the weight moves fast and easy, they contribute far less. So think of it, if you're doing 12, 15 reps, those first 5 to 6, even 8 maybe, aren't contributing as much growth as that last 4 or 5. Okay, if they're starting to slow down, you barely get into 12, 13, but eking those out, those are your growth movers. All right, this means a set taken to true failure and a set stopped 1 to 2 reps short of failure often produce very similar growth results because both sets accumulated a similar number of effective reps, but the set stopped short costs you significantly less in terms of fatigue and recovery. All right, this is measured using a scale that we call RIR. It's your reps in reserve, training most of your working sets to a 0 to 3 range, meaning 0 to 3 reps short of failure appears to be that good, sweet little middle spot for maximizing growth while keeping fatigue kind of manageable and still able to train hard, for in a day or two, right? So the next thing we're going to look at is going to be frequency. So frequency, it's meaning how often you train each muscle group per week. Forever, I remember growing up, the standard was you train each muscle group once a week, hitting it with an enormous amount of volume in that single session. We're doing 40, 50 sets of just arms, right? You have a huge arm day. You're going to do 3 or 4 bicep movements and then another 3, 4 tricep movements. Massive arm day, right? Hitting it with enormous volume. The research over the past decade has shifted this significantly, though. So muscle protein synthesis, the actual rebuilding process we covered in episode 1, it stays elevated for roughly 24 to 48 hours after a hard training session, then returns to baseline. Training a muscle group only once a week means you're turning on that growth machinery once and then leaving it idle for the rest of the week. Okay, training each muscle group 2 to 3 times per week and spreading the same total weekly volume across more sessions keeps that growth machinery running more consistently. And current research shows This produces equal or better results than the old once a week approach, especially once your weekly volume gets into that higher end of that 10 to 20 set range. Okay, to summarize the three big dials, it's going to be enough volume to create a strong stimulus without so much stress the recovery collapses. Intensity, close enough to failure to recruit those effective reps without grinding every single set into the ground. And frequency, high enough to keep the growth machinery running through the week instead of spiking it once on Monday and letting it go quiet for the rest of the week. So now we're going to talk about the variable people blame first and understand the absolute least is we'll go deeper is genetics. All right. And we're going to go deeper in that in a few minutes, but here's a short version. Genetics affect your rate of growth and your ultimate ceiling. They do not determine whether the process of which you're working on works for you. All right. The biology is the same for every human being. So let's move from the science into exactly how to kind of apply this. Okay. So your practical application for this. All right. Here's where we're going to build your program that you started last week. And now we're going to kind of refine this program and check it out. Your volume target. Okay. We're going to aim for 12 to 16 hard sets per muscle group per week as your starting point. Okay. If you're new to training, you barely started training, we're going to start closer to the 10 rep or 10 set per muscle group per week. If you've been training seriously for a few years, you may need to be closer to 18 or 20 to keep progressing. All right, you're going to split those across 2 to 3 sessions per muscle group per week rather than just one. A simple upper lower split's going to work for this. You can do, push pull legs, stuff like that. Train 4 days, 3 to 4 days a week, or a push pull leg split repeated twice a week. They both accomplish this very well. All right. The rep ranges, there's a wide range of rep counts that can build muscle effectively. As long as the set is taken close enough to failure, 6 reps and 25 reps can both build muscle, provided both sets are hard. That said, a practical range of 6 to 15 reps for most main lifts gives you a good balance of technique control and effective reps per set. And then the next thing is proximity to failure. So we're going to train most of our working sets, okay, in that 0 to 3 reps in reserve range. We're going to save our true, excuse me, we're going to save our true kind of all out max failure sets for the isolation exercises where our risk of a form breakdown is lower, and we're going to use it pretty sparingly, a couple times a week, maybe on the last set of an exercise even. All right, not in every single set, every session. It's not going to happen. We're not doing that. All right, progression. Exactly what we discussed in episode 1. We're going to track our training, aim to add a rep or a small amount of weight or an extra set over time. All right, if your numbers on the page, right, if you're tracking haven't moved in a couple of weeks, that's your signal to adjust your volume, intensity, or recovery, and not to just kind of guess about what the fuck's going on. Okay. Exercise selection. Build your program around compound movements for the bulk of your volume, since they let you move the most weight and create the most total tension. Then add some isolation movements to target areas that need extra direct work, like arms, calves, rear shoulders, like your rear delts. And then don't forget the other half of this equation. Okay, it's recovery. All of this volume and intensity only converts into muscle if you're sleeping 7 to 9 hours a day, eating enough total food and protein to support the rebuild. A perfect training program on top of poor sleep and poor nutrition, it's going to underperform, because we always say you cannot out-train a poor diet. All right, so that's the framework. That's how we're going to build our program. And now let's get into some of the demonstrations. I'm going to see some videos of me, what I look like for failure, so that way you can see what failure should be looking like for yourself. Okay, I want to take a second to look at these 2 different videos here. One of them is a seated shoulder press. It's a plate-loaded machine at our local crunch. You're going to see me do about 5 reps, and it's going to come to a complete stop. And that's what we're talking about when you're pushing to failure. I knew that I wanted to push to failure on this one. So it's going to push all the way to a complete stop where I get about halfway up and I just can no longer continue pushing through. And that's what I'm talking about with failure. Failure on something that's not going to injure me if I get to it. And then on the next video here, it's me doing a seated row. I love seated row. It's one of my favorite movements, especially as a strength athlete. I get to really just kind of pull in on it. But you're going to see when I do stop, it's just because they slowed down slightly. And I knew that, hey, let's go ahead and cut it there because that's where I'm going to get the most growth. And I still needed to do shoulder press after this. I needed to do lat pull down after this. So we came to a stop where it was probably 2, 3, maybe even 4, but 2 to 3 more reps. And that's that 0 to 3 RAR that we always talk about. And so now from here, we're going to talk about one of the biggest myths after seeing this is training to failure every single time. You always got to train to complete failure. Smith has convinced more people to overtrain, kind of burn out and quit the gym almost any other piece of fitness advice in circulation because people want to just go all in, especially those like New Year's resolution guys that, January, they're just hammering it as often as they can. Then they burn out and they, leave by February or March. Okay. So here's what the research actually shows is that training to complete failure on every single set does not produce meaningfully more growth than stopping 1 to 3 short reps short. And it comes with, a real cost, dramatically higher fatigue, longer recovery time between sessions, and a higher risk of technical breakdown, especially on your heavy compound lifts like a squat or a deadlift, where failing a rep under those loads can, carry some real injury risk. All right, so remember that the effective reps concept from earlier, the RIR that we talked about, most of the growth stimulus from a set comes from those last several hard reps. The ones close to failure, you get the vast majority of that stimulus by stopping just short of failure without paying that full fatigue cost of grinding out an ugly rep. So there is a place and time to train to failure, to that true maximum failure, mainly on your isolation exercises. Where failing a rep on a bicep curl, it's, the weight's just going to stop moving, right? Not on a squat where the bar comes crashing down on you. So we're going to use them sparingly more on, again, final sets, maybe a couple times a week to go all out on your isolation movements. But just remember, right? If you build your entire program or you have a coach currently and their entire program is built around failure to every single set in the session, you're not training harder than everybody else. Okay. You're just recovering worse than everyone else that you see. And your results are going to show it. Okay. So we're going to train hard. We're going to train close to failure. You don't have to train to the edge of a form breakdown on every single set to get the results that you're looking for. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about genetics because I brought it up. That's a question that's sitting on the back of your mind through this entire episode. All right, genetics, they affect muscle growth through a few specific mechanisms, and understanding them will change how you think about your own progress. So first, we're going to talk about muscle fiber distribution. Everyone has a mix of muscle fiber types, generally categorized as slower or more endurance-oriented fibers and faster, more power-oriented fibers that tend to have a greater growth potential. Your personal ratio is largely inherited, and it influences how quickly you respond to certain types of training, though it does not prevent growth from happening. Okay. Next thing is going to be your muscle belly lengths or your insertion points. This is purely anatomical, where your tendon attach and how long your muscle bellies are relative to your bone length. Two people can have the exact same amount of muscle tissue and look noticeably different. We see it all the time in bodybuilding because one person's bicep, for example, has a larger muscle belly that creates more of a visible peak, right? This is genetic. It's permanent and has nothing to do with effort. Again, you see it in bodybuilding all of the time. You have one guy, you have somebody like Arnold who has incredible biceps and always had an incredible peak. And then you have Derek Lunsford, who's an incredible bodybuilder. He's Mr. Olympia, but his biceps just, they don't look as good or have that peak, and it's purely off genetics. It's not like he's not training hard enough for that. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is myostatin levels. All right, myostatin is a protein that limits muscle growth as a kind of biology break. All right, people naturally produce different amounts of it, which partially explain why some of these people that you see add muscle rapidly with relatively little structured effort, while others have to they're hard gainers, right? Everyone has that friend, never goes to the gym, he's always jacked. And then they have the other friend, goes to the gym all the time, looks the same. Okay, that's because probably a myostatin levels kind of issue there. The next thing we're going to look at is a hormonal profile. Baseline testosterone, growth hormone, and IGF-1 levels vary between individuals, and they influence the rate of muscle protein synthesis. And so here's the part that I kind of want you to take from all of this when you're looking at these four different things, four different movers, is genetics influences your rate of growth and your ultimate ceiling, but they do not determine whether the fundamental process works for you. Mechanical tension is still the king when it comes to building muscle in every human being on the planet. Progressive overload still works. Adequate volume, intensity, frequency, and recovery still drive results. All right, so just put that to bed. What genetics change is your potential personal timeline and your personal comparison group. So we're going to stop measuring, if you just started, to someone else who's Mr. Olympia. All right. And we're going to start measuring from when you first started to where you are a year from now. All right. So today's Coach's Corner. All right. I once coached two members who started the exact same day, doing the exact same program. There was a similar age, late 20s, similar starting point, similar effort that I saw every single session that they were in. 6 months in, one of them had changed dramatically, visibly bigger, stronger, the kind of transformation where I was like, hey, this guy's killing it, right? The other one had made some real progress on paper. Like, he has got stronger. He's lifting heavier weights, right? All of the lifts have gone up. But the visible change kind of looked the same. He hadn't changed much visibly. And I could see it was kind of beating up on him, right? Because these two guys are buds. They came out at the same time. They're doing all the same stuff. One gets super duper jacked. The other guy, not as jacked. All right. So he asked me directly one day if he was doing something wrong. And he wasn't. All right. His training was clean, man. His training looked good. His effort was there every single time. What he was running to is exactly what we just covered. All right. They're two different genetic starting points, producing two different rates of visible change from the same work. All right. So here's what I told him, and this is what I want to tell you guys is the lifts in his log were going up every month, right? His work capacity was climbing. His body composition was slowly, steadily improving. And that's kind of what success actually looks like, even when it doesn't look like someone else's kind of highlight reel. So he kept training. A year and a half later, he looked like a completely different person, just on his own timeline instead of someone else's. All right. The lesson isn't that genetics don't matter, because they absolutely do. The lesson is that they only determine your rate, not your outcome. As long as you keep showing up and keep doing the work correctly, comparison will rob you of a result that was always coming, just not always on the schedule you wanted. The mission of the week for this week, your homework. Okay. So first, we're going to open the training log that we made last week, and we're going to count our current weekly sets for one major muscle group. It could be chest, back, legs, arms, shoulders. I don't care. Just count them. Okay. The second, we're going to compare that number to the 10 to 20 set range we covered today. If you're under 10, add 1 or 2 sets to that muscle group this week. If you're already in range, you're going to leave volume alone and instead pay attention to your proximity to failure on your last set of each exercise this week. You're going to rate it honestly on that 0 to 3 RIR scale. And third, if you're currently training each muscle group only once a week, you're doing a bro split, consider splitting that same volume across 2 sessions starting next week's schedule. All right, so that's it. One count, one comparison, one adjustment. It's a small, it's specific, and based on exactly what we learned today. Okay, to bring this all together. So you now understand the real dials that drive muscle growth, volume in the range of 10 to 20 hard sets per muscle group per week, intensity in the 0 to 3 reps in reserve range for most sets, and frequency of 2 to 3 sessions per muscle group per week. All right. You understand that training to complete failure on every set isn't necessary and often works against you by driving fatigue higher without a proportional increase in growth. You also understand that genetics affect your rate and your ceiling, but not whether the process works for you. And that the only honest comparison, again, is from you today to you in a year from now. Okay. That's the complete kind of evidence-based picture of how muscle actually gets built. Okay. And those are the dials that we need to look at when we're turning a dial for training. And those are the dials that I look at as a coach when I need to help someone continue to improve. Okay, so next month or next week, all right, we're tackling a topic surrounded by more bad information than almost any other in fitness. It's how fat loss actually works. Calories, energy balance, the truth about hormones and fat loss, why protein matters just as much as losing fat as it does for building muscle. We're going to talk about NEAT and why it might matter more than your cardio sessions, and the biggest cardio myths still floating around the gyms today. If you've ever wondered why the scale won't move no matter what you try, or whether that new kind of hormone balancing diet that everybody sees and everybody's talking about is legitimate, that episode will give you a real answer. Until then, we'll see you next time. Keep getting after it.